Awesome. All right. So let's pick up where we left off last week on page 52. And so what we were reading before, we were talking about in step 2, how we as a society believed one thing, and then we were given good evidence and the ability to change our mind. And so in many ways, we were using logic and reason to explain why we should change our minds about this idea of belief in a power greater than ourselves. And so the analogy that we were using up until this point was the Wright Brothers. And we as a society believed, there's no way we can build an airplane. That is one of those things that is just scientifically impossible. And then 2 bicycle repairmen, the Wright Brothers, they were able to build a plane, a machine that would fly, as the book says. And we as a culture, as a society, we were able to change our mind. And so much so that in the first full paragraph on page 52, it says, hey, even the most average blue collar worker says, hey, maybe we can go to the moon, right? That is how open-minded we became. And so where we're going to pick up is the middle paragraph that says we had to ask ourselves. And so where we're going to pick up is really asking ourselves why we shouldn't change our mind about this idea of God. So it says we had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply to our human problems the same readiness to change our point of view. And what we're going to read are what's called the bedevilments, which is great modern language. And so if you're wondering, I have my dictionary from the 1930s, and because I'm fun at parties, I like to look things up. And so in the 1930s, the word bedevilment, what it meant was the state of being vexatiously and bewilderingly discarded or disoriented and confused. And boy, that clears that up, right? And so what it's saying, to have a bedevilment is to be at this place of like, my life is in disarray and I don't know why. That's really what we're talking about. I just also love throwing out like, oh, I'm just positively bedeviled. I'm quite vexed. Just normal conversations. Anywho, so when we talk about the bedevilments, a lot of what we're talking about is the spiritual malady. What I experience when I am separated from alcohol, when I'm separated from substance. And I can look and I can ask myself, is this my experience? Now, at the top of page 51, it asked me to lay aside the drink question. So sober, is this my experience? Was I having trouble with my personal relationships? Were things starting to fall apart and I was losing friends, romantic, important relationships? Were things starting to disintegrate in my life? It says we couldn't control our emotional natures. I don't know about you, but for me, when I was sober and when I am sober without the power of God, without these 12 steps, that's when my emotions are all over the place. It says we were a prey to misery and depression. Does it feel like that misery, that depression, that feeling where it's on me and I can't get it off? Is that my experience? We couldn't make a living. Now, of course, that for me, there were times I was definitely unemployable, but also have I been unemployed? Have I been miserable at work? Did my work life seem empty and futile and I can't seem to show up in the way that I want to show up? Did I have it says we had a feeling of uselessness. Was this my experience? We were full of fear. Is that my experience? We were unhappy. We couldn't seem to be of real help to other people. And I can ask myself, is this my experience? And is this my experience sober? Because one of the most incredible things and one of the most confusing things is when I got sober, that was my experience. When I got sober, I became incredibly full of fear and incredibly depressed. And it felt like there was a hole in the depth of my soul. It felt like that anxiety so bad, my shoulder blades were being stabbed. It felt like I was a raw, exposed nerve ending. And for some ungodly reason, it was the wind was blowing and my existence was agony. And that's how I felt sober. And when I came to this thing, when I came to 12-step, and if you asked me what I thought my problem was, I would have told you my problem is substance. I would have told you that my problem is alcohol. But for me, what happens when I put down the alcohol, when I get separated, I'm left in this place of pain and misery, and I don't know what's wrong with me. And again, if I didn't have the mental obsession, and if I didn't have the physical allergy, I would probably just be miserable and I would probably end my life. But the problem is for me as an alcoholic is that pain, that spiritual malady. It fuels that mental obsession. I get a thought that tells me, I know what'll fix this pain. And I take the drink and off I go. And one of the things that it does say why we shouldn't apply our human problems the same readiness to change our point of view. The spiritual malady, of course, it's got some pretty serious implications for an alcoholic, but is not limited to alcoholics. I think there are many human beings who experience the spiritual malady. But the problem is for somebody like me, when I have that sense of separateness from God and that sense of separateness from alcohol, I am left in pain. And I have a thought that'll take me back time and time and time again to that first drink. And so that's the thing in step one, we really focus on the twofold nature of my alcoholism. We talk about the physical allergy and the mental obsession. We talk about lack of control, and we talk about lack of choice, and we talk about that again and again and again. And what I've found is we open up to really discussing the spiritual malady in steps 2 and 3 and 4 and so on. And so asking ourselves, was not a basic solution to these bedevilments, my present issues, my present problems, my present pain, was that more important than whether or not we should see newsreels of lunar flight? Of course it was. If I can change my mind about scientific evidence, I can change my mind about the power of God working in my life. And welcome those who just joined us. We're on page 52, and I'm glad you're here. And it says, when we saw others solve their problems, and that is the hope that's on offer, by a simple reliance upon the capital S, capital U, Spirit of the universe. We had to stop doubting the power of God. And what, of course, opens me up to the belief in the power of God? Well, I come to the rooms and I see you. And I see that you are happy and sober at the same time, even on weekends. And that simple reliance, how do I create that simple reliance upon the Spirit of the universe? Well, very simply, it's working these 12 steps like my life depends upon it. And if I am an alcoholic, turns out it does. And so again, welcome to those who just joined us. We're on page 52, and we're at the very, very bottom paragraph. It starts with the Wright Brothers. So the Wright Brothers, almost childish faith that they could build a machine which would fly, was the mainspring of their accomplishment. And what we're talking about is men who have faith. And the Wright Brothers, they had faith that they could build an airplane. But something that's important for me to understand is they did not have the airplane yet, but they had faith. And so when I'm at step 2 and I'm saying, man, I don't really know God, or I haven't experienced God, or I don't feel like my conception is enough, of course, that is okay. I'm like the Wright Brothers and believing an airplane is possible. Now, one of the great themes of this book is faith. So these men have faith, and I can start with faith, and I need to start with faith, just a little bit of belief, but faith without works is dead. So I can believe an airplane is possible. And nowadays I can see all of you flying around with your airplane, spiritually speaking. But if I do not take the action and build the airplane, I won't get it. So I don't have it yet, and there's action to take. And again, what's the action? The rest of the steps as a way of life, like my life depends on it. And it says, our ideas did not work, but the God idea did. Is that my experience? All right, when I see people in the rooms who are happy and sober at the same time, people that are able to laugh at themselves and look each other in the eye, people that don't feel as though they're currently a prey to misery and depression, who are able to show up to life with a sense of joy and meaning and purpose. Man, I had never felt that before. Never felt that. My life was the bedevilments. This might be a weird sentence, but I can tell you I was absolutely bedeviled in kindergarten. Life had me in preschool. You know what I mean? Not often, because it's a little, it's a little bit of a weird sentence, but I can't tell you how anxiety inducing tying my shoes was when I was in kindergarten. And in kindergarten, this little ginger, I needed like a shot of whiskey and maybe like a Huda crack or something, but you're not giving that to a kindergartner, you know what I'm saying? And so I just needed something to take the edge off of life. And that was always my experience. And so the Wright brothers, they had this faith, which and so I'll read the sentence again. The Wright brothers' almost childish faith that they could build a machine which would fly was the mainspring of their accomplishment. So that faith was at the core. Without that, nothing could have happened. We agnostics and atheists were sticking to the idea that self-sufficiency, me relying on self and my powers and my abilities, would solve our problems, when others showed us that God's sufficiency worked with them. So we're seeing that in the rooms. And again, if I'm alone with just a copy of this book where I can turn to the stories, and I can see the examples of alcoholics who came and worked these steps and were able to stay sober, and God's sufficiency worked for them. And so it says, we began to feel like those who had insisted rights would never fly. And now what we're doing is we're addressing the argument of logic. Man, this whole God thing, it's not logical. We're going to talk about that. So the book, again, is going to meet us where we're at and take us where we need to go. So logic is great stuff. It's good news. I don't have to get rid of my logic. I don't have to throw that out the window. Logic is great stuff. We liked it. We still like it. It is not by chance that we were given the power to reason, to examine the evidence of our senses and to draw conclusions. That is one of man's magnificent attributes. We, agnostically inclined, would not feel satisfied with a proposal which does not lend itself to reasonable approach and interpretation. So again, I can't logic my way through the steps, and I can't intellectualize my way through the steps. I need to take the actions of the steps. But approaching the second step, when I see that every attempt that I had to stay sober failed, and everything that I tried to put between me and that first drink failed, and everything that I tried to allow me to be sober and comfortable and in my own skin failed. And you guys felt like that. And you guys experienced that. You experienced humiliating relapse after relapse after relapse, just like I did. And you're happy and you're sober. And I use logic and say that whatever you are doing is working and what I'm doing is not. And it says, hence we're at pains to tell you why we think our present faith is reasonable. Why we believe it more sane and logical to believe than not to believe. Why we say our former thinking was soft and mushy when we threw up our hands in doubt and said, we don't know. And so what we're saying is, man, there are people who have belief and they have freedom, and I didn't have that. So maybe it's more logical, maybe it's more reasonable to believe that they believe and start from there. And now this next paragraph is step 2, part 2. So this is going to be our second step proposition. And so it says, when we became alcoholics crushed by a self-imposed crisis, rude to call us out on that, rude, self-imposed, rude, but a self-imposed crisis we could not postpone or evade. I couldn't put it off any longer. I couldn't avoid it anymore. We had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is everything or else he is nothing. God either is or he isn't. What is our choice to be? Now in step 2, what I need to believe. So what I come to in the second step is came to believe that a power greater than ourselves? And we already answered that question. Okay, I believe that there could be a power greater than myself. And the second part of step 2 is came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Can I believe that this power is more powerful than my alcoholism? Can I believe that this power can relieve from me that mental obsession, that insane thought that I have to take that first drink? And so that is how we can reconcile that question. What do I believe is more powerful? My little alcoholism, or the infinite power of the spirit of the universe that seems to work in your life? I kind of phrased it in a bit of a leading way, right? Can I believe that God is bigger than my alcoholism? And that's it. And if I can get there, that's step 2. That's it. I'm just believing there is a power, and I'm believing that power is greater than my alcoholism. That being said, the book asks the question, and I believe it's important to answer the question as it was asked. So it is important to reconcile it and to explain, whoa, this is a heavy question. How are we going to answer that at this point? I just believe that maybe there's a power greater than myself. I express some willingness. You want me to answer the question, God is everything or else he's nothing, God either is or he isn't? That's heavy. That's a big leap of faith, and we're going to see it describe that leap of faith. But again, here is how I reconcile that question. What I do with sponsees is I ask, have you had any moment where by seconds and inches you should not be alive today? Have you had any experience where by seconds and inches you should not be sober, and here you are today? Have you had any experiences like that? Most of us have, right? And then I'll ask, have you had any experience of the presence of God? And what I mean by that, have you felt that connectedness? Have you had that moment where you knew that all was well, and that all would be well? Have you had any, maybe, I'm blessed to live where I live in the world. Have you had that moment of awe and wonder at the night sky or by the Rocky Mountains, that connectedness? Have you seen the face of God in a child? Have you had that moment? And if I can say that I've had those moments, or even if I can say, I believe that you, Paige, have had those moments, or you and 12, the rest of you wonderful people in 12 Step have had those moments, and you're not lying to me, then I'm left with the proposition that God is. Because if I have had any moment of God, any experience of God in my life, I cannot say that God isn't. And if God is everything or God is nothing, that I am left with the proposition that God is, and that God is everything. And I would say that, and I've had somebody that would get real riled up and say, Paige, how can you say that? What about the tragedies and the horrors of life? And what I will say is, I cannot answer your pain, right? I cannot answer your tragedy, but I can share you the experience of mine. And for me, what I know is that if God is in those moments of beauty and of presence, and those moments where I'm alive today by seconds and inches, then what I know without a shadow of a doubt, that God is in those dark moments of my life. God is in those dark nights of the soul. God is in those moments of indescribable pain and suffering. You know, and I have this experience, and I won't go into too much detail about it, because one, want to get through the chapter. Two, it might not be the most appropriate, but this spring, I sat with my uncle as he passed away from cancer, and I sat with him the 9 days as he died. And it was not a pleasant passing, and it was not an easy passing. And I was there and bear witnessing to a level of pain and suffering that I have never known and never experienced and before in my life. And, you know, I'm an alcoholic, and I lived on the streets, and before COVID, I'd meet people right outside the safe consumption site. So like a hotbed of people suffering from the illness of addiction and people in the throes of suffering and pain. And I had not seen anything like that before in my life. And it was absolutely horrific. And at the same time, I was acutely aware of the presence of God. And it can be so easy for me to say, come and be like, where is God in that suffering? And where is God in that pain? And this actually, maybe I'm meant to talk about this because this might tie in so well with what we're going to read on page 55. But where was God in his agony, and where was God in his suffering? And there were periods of time where he would be crying out. He wasn't really able to scream in the traditional sense, but because he had lost his voice, but screaming every 20 minutes, help me, help me, help me. And I would be up all night with him. And where was God in that? And I can tell you, God without question was in my heart, because every single time he cried out for help, I was able to be there, and be there with love and unconditional love, and to show up in a way that I'm not able to show up for others. See, when it talks about we couldn't be of real use to other people, man, I couldn't show up for anyone. I could codependent my way through things, and I could drag people to detox, and it never worked. But to show up in a meaningful way, and to show up in a way that I never could before. And in those moments, there was the indescribable presence of God and experiences of God. And so it's not God is just in the happy times, but in my experience, God has been with me in that sorrow. And that is what I hold on to when I experience, and I do experience, those dark nights of the soul, those depths of human suffering. Not because I'm an alcoholic, not because I'm not spiritually fit, but because I'm human, and those things happen to us. And I know it's a heavy one for step 2. And so it asks us to take this leap of faith. And now, again, the book is going to meet us where we're at and take us where we need to go, because it's going to help us make that leap. It says, arrived at this point, we were squarely confronted with the question of faith. And again, that's why I want to ask the question as is. It says we couldn't duck the issue. And I did. Of course, I wanted to duck the issue. Also, this is just a very random tangent. But when I work with sponsees, sometimes I'm like, hey, if you're not sure if God is a loving God, now I joke around with my sponsees, but keep in mind, the duck's feet are orange. Only a loving God would do that. It's delightful. Anyway, just thought I'd bring some levity to the situation. Bringing up the waterfowl, as I do. So we couldn't duck the issue. So it says some of us have already walked over the capital B, capital R, bridge of reason towards the desired shore of faith. So we were using reason to get us there. And that's what it's saying that we're doing. Use reason to change my mind. Use logic to change my mind. And we got there. And it says the outlines and the promise of capital N, capital L, new land brought luster to tired eyes and fresh courage to flagging spirits, that light on in the eyes. There's that hope. And I see, like, what that looks like is I've had my butt handed to me by alcoholism, and I see that hope that's on offer. And I want what you have. Man, I don't know about this God thing, and God is everything, and I'm just not sure about taking that leap. That's what it's saying. It says we were grateful that capital R reason had brought us so far. Now keep in mind that R is capitalized because is it not that we put reason in the position of God in our lives? And so reason had brought us so far, but somehow we couldn't quite step ashore. We were not taking that leap. Perhaps we had been leaning too heavily on capital R reason that last mile, and we did not like to lose our support. That was natural. So again, the book meeting us where we're at. But let us think about it a little more closely. Without knowing it, had we brought to where we stood by a certain kind of faith? So what we're answering is that question, how could I have faith? I have no capacity for faith. And we're going to see the abundance of faith that we've exhibited in our lives up until this moment. It says, for did we not believe in our own reasoning? Did we not have confidence in our ability to think? What was that but a sort of faith? Yes, we've been faithful, abjectly faithful to the capital G, capital R, God of reason. So in one way or another, we discovered that faith had been involved all the time. And it's an interesting thing as an alcoholic, because absolutely I come here and I have faith in my ability to reason, and I have faith in my ability to think, and I have faith in my mental capacity. And yet I will get an insane thought that tells me I can drink again. And I'll think, you know what? I can drink again. So despite all the evidence that I should not have faith in my own reasoning, especially when it comes to alcohol, I come to the second step with faith. You know, it's one of those things, and again, this is kind of me joking around a little, but I always, now this is when we come here, it's like, hey, I don't have the capacity for faith or belief, and I'm sure that you lovely, wonderful people have never ended up in the back of a police car. All I'm saying is that I have, and all I'm saying is that the Calgary Police Service time and time again proved to be a power greater than myself. So there's evidence of one. And every time I ended up in the back of a police car, turns out I had made a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of that power. Now, next week, when we get to the third step, we get to see how we'll turn it all over to a nicer, kinder power that'll take us to better places. But I can also ask myself, and I kind of joke when I do talks and work with sponsees, it's like, hey, I don't know if I have the capacity for faith. I always ask, you ever taken a floor pill? If anyone here does not know what a floor pill is, that is a pill that you found on the floor. All I'm saying is that takes faith. You know what I mean? And if you found a floor pill in a car, you know, a car floor pill, ooh, second step ain't nothing. Third step ain't nothing. You're ready to go. You could write inventory. You got faith for days, right? And so, and what's my experience? And my experience is there was not a single time that I doubted the power of alcohol in my life. There was not a single time that I came to alcohol without faith that it would relieve the pain that I was feeling. That it would not take me out of that agony that I was experiencing. I had faith, but I'd been putting my faith in the wrong things. And now, again, we're going to see not only had we have faith, but it goes on to say on page 54, we found too that we had been worshipers. So not only I have faith, but I worship. What a state of mental goose flesh that used to bring on. So like mental goose pimples, like what? And it said, had we not variously worshiped people, sentiment, things, money, and ourselves. I don't know about you, but worshiping people has looked a lot for me like codependency. And it can be codependency with somebody in a romantic situation, but it can also look like I need you to like me or I'm not okay. Sentiment, you know, those good old days, those principles, those ideals, those ones that I could not even live up to on my own. I remember there was quite a word when I was experiencing some homelessness as a direct result of my actions. There were the codes of the street and certain things that you shouldn't say and certain things that you shouldn't do, and that was put up on that. Okay, we're going to follow those rules. I mean, nobody did, but you know, we're going to follow those rules, right? And then it talks about things, money, ourselves. Did I not worship? You know, if I have this much money, or if I have this career, or if I have this sense of worth and esteem, that I'll be okay. And to worship myself, does that not look like ego? Now, I didn't come at this thing with Paige is so great, she's so wonderful. I came with I am the biggest piece of garbage that ever lived. That's how I came to this deal. But I thought I knew best, and I thought I knew right. And in that way, did I not worship myself and my ideas? And then I love this, because this is what opens us up again, experience. It says, and then with a better moment, had we not worshipfully beheld the sunset, the sea, or a flower? Have we not just been in awe of nature of God's world, of God's creation. And it's so often that when we're in nature, it's easy to feel that connectedness with that power, which is God. And it says, who of us had not loved something or somebody? How much did these feelings, these loves, these worships have to do with pure reason? Now, again, I'm not a parent, but for those that are parents, loving teenagers is not logical or reasonable. And I'm saying that as somebody that used to be a teenager. That can be difficult, and yet we love them. You know, and I talk about this sometimes when I do talks, more at a different point. But often when I talk about God's unconditional love, I talk about that sort of parenting experience. Again, I'm an aunt, and I have the most incredible, wonderful niece and nephew, and it's absolutely a privilege to be in their life. But I'm sure every parent has had these days where they are on, it doesn't matter whether 2 or 22, but they're on your last nerve, like all day, every day. And you just, at the end of the day, you're like, just go to bed. And you finally get them settled, and they're finally in bed, and you have the house to yourself, and you take that breath and have that quiet moment. And then after not that long, you miss them. You do that thing where you go to the room and you open the door and you just watch them sleep because you miss them. And I imagine if that is how we as human beings, and I'm saying for myself as a deeply flawed, defect-riddled human being, how might the God that is on offer here feel about you? You know, if we can feel that way about other human beings, how might God feel about you? And so it says, we're not these things, the tissue out of which our lives were constructed, to not the things that have given us the most sense of meaning and purpose in our life. Has it not been those loves, those moments of presence, those moments of peace? That is what guides us. And it says it was impossible to say we had no capacity for faith. And we can say that because I've been running by it, right? I had faith in the bottle. I had faith in my own thinking. I had faith in my codependent relationship. I had faith in all those things, or love, or worship. In one form or another, we've been living by faith in little else. And we're just at the very bottom paragraph of page 54. Glad you're here. It says, imagine life without faith. Were nothing left but pure reason, it wouldn't be life. But we believed in life. Of course we did. We cannot prove life in the sense that you can prove a straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points, yet there it was. Life is not this thing that is rational and logical, but it's there. Could we still say this whole thing was nothing but a mass of electrons created out of nothing, meaning nothing, whirling onto a destiny of nothingness? Of course we couldn't. The electrons themselves seem more intelligent than that, at least so the chemist said. Right? And last week I shared that story about my aunt who was an electrochemist and had absolute faith in God at the exact same time, and understood the world and its very precise and immutable laws, to quote the book, because I don't know too much about electrons. But I do know they follow this logic and reason, and there seems to be these things that are guiding beneath the science. And then it says, hence we saw that reason isn't everything. Neither is reason, as most of us use it, entirely dependable, even though it emanates from our best minds, which is rude. Rude of you to call me out again, right? Again, my best thinking, like we hear it in the rooms, my best thinking got me here, right? The best that I could come up with was coming to 12 Step and asking for help. And it says, what about people who proved that man could never fly? Again, we're going back to that metaphor where we're stuck in no, I know. And we were given evidence and changed our mind. And it goes on to say, yet we have been seeing another kind of flight, which I always thought would be a beautiful name for a meeting. That's not the name of this one. Named it something else, but a beautiful name for a meeting. Another kind of flight, a spiritual liberation from this world. People who rose above their problems. Freedom, not only from the mental obsession, that insane thought to go back to the first string, but freedom from the bedevilments, freedom from the bondage of self, freedom from that feeling of uselessness of self-pity, freedom from that. And it says, they said God made these things possible, and we only smiled. We had seen spiritual release, but like to tell ourselves it wasn't true. It says, actually, and these next two paragraphs, they're incredibly powerful. And I didn't, and that's one of the things I love about this book is, and I'll joke with people, it's like, oh, the little big book elves have been in here updating things, right? And what happens is, one of the ways that you can kind of tell literature is divinely inspired is that it grows and changes with the reader. And that's always been my experience. There's been times in this book where the meaning of what's written down awakens to a new meaning that I did not understand and I did not realize. And it says, actually, we were fooling ourselves, for deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. And here's my experience. I've been sharing more personal stories than I normally do at the study. But again, you know how I said I was that very anxious toddler that couldn't tie her shoes and needed a little bit of whiskey and perhaps a hoot of crack cocaine? Well, that same anxious toddler was shown, when you're in school and they show you fire safety videos. I was not going to be playing with fire. I did not need to see that. That was not good for my little neurotic psyche. And I spent the next several years of my life, every single night, again, well adjusted. I don't know how you ended up with alcoholism. It's just a physical allergy and a mental obsession that's fueled by the spiritual malady. Doesn't have anything to do with my fire safety videos, but every single night before I went to bed, I would pray and I would ask, please, God, don't let the house burn down. Please, God, don't let the house burn down. Please, God, don't let the house burn down. Really well-adjusted child. But there was something in me that was yearning to a power greater than myself, even at an early age. And even as a child, I mean, maybe things that weren't quite as serious as my weird sense that it's going to burn down. Oh, it kind of did, but it was the fabric of my life that I burnt down through alcoholism. But even as a kid, when you got a pop quiz in school, oh, please don't let me fail. Oh, please help. There's that yearning for something greater than myself. And it says, so this fundamental idea of God. Now, this is the idea. I don't have that relationship yet, but it says it may be obscured, which is to say blocked, obscured by calamity. Calamity is the bad things that happen in life. And we can talk about things like genuinely, really traumatic things. We're going to turn the page and see some evidence of calamity and what calamity looks like. Awful, painful, tragic, traumatic things. That is calamity. By pomp. Pomp just means ego. And of course, it can be the I am so great ego, but it can also be that I'm the biggest piece of garbage that ever lived ego. By worship of other things. Hey, whatever things could I worship? Well, it's said on 54. People, codependency, sentiment, things, money, and ourselves. I put that sense of value and worth into those things, and that cuts me off from this view, this idea of God. And it says, but in some form or another, it is there. And see, that's the thing. There is hope in that sentence. Because if I am coming to this study today and I don't have a connection with a power greater than myself, or I'm struggling with belief in a power greater than myself, I can be comforted to know it is there. And we're going to read some step 2 promises here in a little bit. That's exciting. It says, for faith and a capital P power greater than ourselves and miraculous demonstrations of that power in human lives are facts as old as man himself. Facts, not theories, not hopes, not wishes, facts. But I love that it is miraculous demonstration. Because at step 2, what we're starting is just with that belief that there could be a power greater than ourselves, and that that power could relieve me from that insane thought to pick up that drink. But more than that, we're going to grow into where we become a demonstration of that power. We spoke in There's a Solution about how our deportment shouts, how we carry ourselves, how that carries a message of depth and weight, that we get to be a demonstration of that power. That is incredible. I couldn't be of real use to other people. I now get to be a demonstration of a power that at this point I'm just believing might exist, and that Paige wouldn't lie about that, right? It says we finally saw that faith in some kind of God was a part of our makeup, just as much as the feeling we have for a friend. You know, that very natural, very normal, very warm, comforting feeling. Again, earlier on in the chapter, we spoke about those punishing ideas of God, but feeling we have for a friend. And in Bill's story, when he was talking about how he worked the steps, he said, my newfound capital F friend, taking away his defects, root and branch. That is a way in which I can relate to that power, which is God, friend. Sometimes we had to search fearlessly, but he was there. He was as much a fact as we were. We found the capital G, capital R, great reality deep down within us. And that's the good news. I do a lot of like spiritual seeking and various faith traditions, but I do it because I'm excited by God, and I'm excited by this power, and I get excited to grow and to do these things. But I don't need to. Where is God? Where is one of the places that God can be found deep down within in my heart? And that's why I was like, oh, maybe I was meant to tell that story. When that presence of God was in my heart and I was able to show up in a way that was not possible for somebody like me, but in a way that I always wanted to. And it says, in the last analysis, it is only there that he may be found. It was so with us. And so what we're going to do is in step 3, we're going to make a decision to do the rest of the steps, to live this way of life like our life depends on it. And what the steps are going to do is clear away that calamity, clear away that pomp, clear away that self that is blocking me from God. That's what we're doing. And it says we can only clear the ground a bit, right? With what we've written in this chapter, We Agnostics, and sharing our experience. And it says, if our testimony helps sweep away prejudice, again, a prejudice is just to have an old idea about an experience I have not had. Enables you to think honestly, encourages you to search diligently within yourself. Then, if you wish, you can join us on the capital B, capital H, broad highway. We're going to see the broad highway again in the 5th step promises. We're going to see the great reality referenced again. So at this point, we're saying maybe it could exist, but we're going to experience it as we take the rest of the steps. And this is a promise. This is a 2nd step promise. With this attitude, so I have to be armed with this attitude. I do have to have the attitude of sweeping away prejudice, thinking honestly, searching diligently. With this attitude, you cannot fail. The consciousness of your belief is sure to come. When I work with people, sometimes I have to remind them that Alcoholics Anonymous or 12-step has to be alcoholic proof. You know what I mean? It's like we can't mess it up because we're a bunch of drunks. You know what I mean? And that is a promise that if I show up with that attitude and follow that attitude up with action, I cannot fail. You will experience the consciousness of your belief. And again, that consciousness is with knowing. You will experience that with knowing of the God of your understanding. And it says, in this book, you will read the experience of a man who thought he was an atheist. His story is so interesting that some of it should be told now. His change of heart, and I love that change of heart as a description for a spiritual awakening. His change of heart was dramatic, convincing, and moving. And so this is the story of our friend Fitz Mayo, Fitzmayo. And his story is in our book, and it's Our Southern Friend. Now, if you remember from the doctor's opinion, this is the same guy who hid in a deserted barn, determined to die. And he was rescued by a searching party and brought to the town's hospital. And we're like, oh, he's in bad shape. And Dr. Silkworth's like, well, better let those alcoholics, work with him. And I don't know if that'll help. And as a result of taking the steps, he has a dramatic transformation. And we're going to read this now. So we're at the top of page 56, and what we're going to read is Fitz Mayo's difficulties in belief in God. We're going to see what the barriers that Fitz Mayo has to this belief in a power greater than himself. And if I can relate to those, wonderful, right? And that's one of the things you'll notice a pattern in this book is almost every chapter starts with information and then gives us stories, because that's how we learn. So our friend was a minister's son. Oh boy, right? That'd be a barrier. And it says he attended church school where he became rebellious at what he thought an overdose of religious education. So he had religion shoved down his throat. Oh, I was a minister's son. I had to go to church and church school. I'm done with it, right? For years thereafter, he was dogged by trouble and frustration. And these are examples of calamities. It says business failure, insanity, fatal illness, suicide. These calamities, that's what we're talking about. Yes, sometimes a calamity could be this stub toe, and it feels like that at times, but calamities, it really is like these really difficult, painful things, right? And if I can relate to that trauma, that tragedy, that pain, right? If there's a God, why this, right? They embittered and depressed him. Post-war disillusionment, again, we're talking about after the First World War. And it's sort of that after the First World War, there was so many young men who died, and there were the horrors of war and the futility of like, why did we as a society do that and go through that? And it seemed meaningless. And ever more serious alcoholism. Impending mental and physical collapse brought him to the point of self-destruction. Those are the barriers. But those often can be perfect conditions for me to be open. At the same time, closed and open. I know that's a weird thing to say, but it's only when I come to myself that I'm open to another way. So it says, one night when confined in a hospital, he was approached by an alcoholic who had known a spiritual experience. Our friend's gorge rose, which I just love. And I regularly do not say, excuse me, this has aroused my gorge, nearly enough in polite conversation. I need to do it more. But so he's getting angry and he's getting defensive and he's getting like, you don't know what I went through, right? That's what it means by his gorge rose. As he bitterly cried out, if there is a God, he certainly hasn't done anything for me. That resistance, right? He's close. But later, alone in his room, he asked himself this question: is it possible that all the religious people I have known are wrong? While pondering the answer, he felt as though he lived in hell. Then, like a thunderbolt, a great thought came. It crowded out all else. Who are you to say there is no God? And he's alone in this room. And once we finish this chapter, we're going to pop over to page 215. And you can make a note that this happens in his story on page 215, where he's alone and he's in this hospital bed and he's feeling that hell, that depth of alone, that depth of separateness. And that thought, who are you to say there is no God? And this is Fitz Mayo's second step experience. It says this man recounts that he tumbled out of bed to his knees. In a few seconds, he was overwhelmed by a conviction of the capital P presence of God. And I love it when we capitalize those words that are verbs. Just for me, I love the idea that God is a present tense verb, that God is in action in the here and now, the presence of God. And it says it poured over and through him with the certainty and majesty of a great tide at flood. If you've ever seen a river at flood, I mean, there is power, and it's just taking things with it. And this is what is getting taken with that tide at flood, the river at flood, what's being swept away. It says the barriers he had built through the years were swept away. The barriers in the first paragraph are taken from him. He stood in the capital P, capital I, capital L. He stood in the presence of infinite power and love. He stepped from bridge to shore. For the first time, he lived in conscious companionship with his creator. So that with knowing, and I love again companionship, that friendship, that it's not this mean, punitive, angry, punishing God. There's friendship, there's kindness, there's warmth. And so it says, thus was our friend's cornerstone fixed in place. And you'll remember our cornerstone comes from the belief, can I believe, or am I even willing to believe that there is a power greater than myself? That is our cornerstone as well. Now, Fitz Mayo has a powerful cornerstone because the power of God comes down, and who are you to say there is no God? That is the first part of his second step experience. And what I will say is most of us do not have this experience at the second step. Most of us have that, okay, I can believe there's a power greater than myself. I can believe you jerks in the rooms aren't lying to me, right? But I will say, I've been in rooms where I've heard people who are like, oh, I mean, you don't hope or don't expect to have an experience like that. And I'm trying to watch my language. So I would say no to that, with no swear words, no to that. That is not my experience. An experience like that is absolutely not out of reach. See, just like as an alcoholic, I cannot stay well on one drink. As an alcoholic, I have found that I cannot stay well on one experience. And I've got to continue to grow and to seek and to have these experiences. And I think that's why I probably rebel against that idea of like, oh, you can't have one like Bill, or oh, you can't have one like Fitz, or oh, the best you can hope for is one of the educational variety. Because I had one like that. And I don't want to go too long on that sort of tangent, but I kind of want to share it because I think it's important, because there's nothing special about me. I'm just a run-of-the-mill drunk who also did a lot of drugs. You know what I mean? There's nothing special about me. And one of the things that I do is I seek from a variety of spiritual traditions and faiths. You don't have to do that. That's just something that I do that nurtures and enriches my step 11 practice. And I like spiritual holidays, but I don't like the ones that are the lights and the food and the fun. I like the ones that are like, let's give stuff up. Whee! Again, I'm fun. And we were coming up to one of those spiritual holidays, and it was one of those giving things up. And I didn't know what I should give up. And I was asking some of my sponsees, and they're like, why don't you give up vaping? You're pretty addicted to nicotine. And I, of course, was like, absolutely not. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I would never rank my sponsees, but if I did, you'd be at the bottom. You know what I mean? That sort of thing. No, absolutely not. And then I was doing some two-way prayer. And two-way prayer is a practice that a lot of the Oxford group members did, very, very early AA did. And of course, I asked in two-way prayer, what should I give up for this holiday? And, it was in that process, I had an experience where it was one of those, who are you to say there is no God? And it was, how big is your God? And what came with that was this deep knowing is, I'm asking these people, these sponsees, to trust me. And I'm asking them to trust God, but I'm not willing to trust God with this. And so I said, all right, that's it. I'm going to give up nicotine, right? And I had that, who are you to say there is no God? How big is your God moment? And then, of course, you know, and what happened was I was working with more and more sponsees, and it was working out where like I was vaping less and the nicotine was, and by the way, this is not a quit smoking, quit nicotine story at all, not even a little bit. I don't care if you smoke at all. But what happened for me is I was meeting sponsees, and so I was, you know, smoking less and, you know, lower and lower levels of nicotine because I couldn't go out and vape. And I was like, maybe this is meant to happen. And the day before, I was like, oh, no, I've made a terrible mistake. No, I'm going to give up being mean to me or something like that. I don't know. No, absolutely not giving up the nicotine. And I was receiving a 5th step from a sponsee, and I had another sponsee booked, and in between. And if I know we're a little over, so if you got to go, you got to go. That's okay. We're almost done. This ties in, and I think it might be helpful. So I was going out for a smoke with them, and I had my vape, and it had a lanyard on it, and the lanyard caught on the brake of my wheelchair, and it smashed to the ground. And I have not had any nicotine since. And that is not, oh, good job, Paige, not smoking. No, that is an example of the power of God working in my life in a way that I never thought it could. And again, I'm reminded not to sell the power of God short, and I am reminded that God is everything or else God is nothing, and God surely is bigger than that thing that I don't want to let go of. And again, who's to say we can't have Fitz Mayo experiences, because I did. And so that is his cornerstone. So that is his belief in a power greater than himself. And it says, no later vicissitude has shaken it. That means trouble or worry or frustration or problem. His alcoholic problem was taken away that very night. Years ago, it disappeared. Save for a few brief moments of temptation, the thought of drink has never returned. At such times, a great revulsion has risen up in him. Seemingly, he could not drink even if he would. God had restored his sanity. So in the 2nd step, I need to believe that there is a God, and that power, that there is a power, and that power can relieve from me the insane thought that I have to take the first drink or drug or whatever brings you to Big Book Compendium. And that was what happened to Fitz. And his is a powerful one because he had that experience of God, and the mental obsession was removed. And it is powerful what happened for him. And it says, what is that but a miracle of healing? Yet its elements are simple. So to get us to that place of spiritual awakening, he had his at step 2, and we will have ours at step 12. It says, circumstances made him willing to believe. He humbly offered himself to his capital and maker, and then he knew. Even so has God restored us all to our right minds. So those of us who have recovered, those of us who have experienced this, we have been restored to our right minds. The mental obsession has been relieved. To this man, the revelation was sudden. Absolutely, fair enough. Some of us grow into it more slowly, but he has come to all who have honestly sought him. And so what is asked of me to do is to seek that power. And how I do that is the 12 steps. And again, sounds like a promise. When we drew near to him, he disclosed himself to us. That will happen. Now, one of the things, and I promise I will end on this. Let's pop over to page 215, because I love the sneaky promises and I love the sneaky prayers. So next week, as we get into how it works, we will lay down our foundation for step 3. And if you're not that we'd ever be bored with the 3rd step prayer, it's a beautiful, wonderful prayer. But if we want another prayer that we could say, we can always use the Fitz Mayo 3rd step prayer. Nobody calls it this. I call it this because I'm weird. But if you go to 215, it's that paragraph where it says that isn't the way. So he's talking about, he's had this who are you to say there is no God experience. And he's talking to an alcoholic, and he's saying, how does this prayer thing work? And he's like, hey, you've probably prayed, get me out of this one. Well, that's not how we pray. And so this is the prayer that was given to Fitz Mayo, and this is a prayer that I say on a daily basis. It says, God, here I am, and here are all my troubles. I've made a mess of things and I can't do anything about it. You take me in all my troubles and do anything you want with me. We'll pick up step 3 next week.